Good morning and welcome to the Pleasure for Health podcast. I'm Ailsa Kepi and I'm your host today. And we are going to talk about the sacred marriage within, or the alchemical marriage, the Hieros Gamos. All of those terms are relating to a similar process that has been around for centuries in the alchemists of past centuries have worked really hard to find this way of working with ourselves. So the alchemical process could be seen as bringing together silver and gold, or creating the philosopher's stone, all these kinds of things. But really, when we look at it, it is a way also in ourselves to bring our parts of our psyche together so that we become more whole, more integrated, more able to be ourselves. And I'm really excited about this concept because we are running a retreat here at our Celtic Hearth in Nova Scotia on this exact topic in just over a month's time, just about 1 month away. And I thought I would, talk a little bit about how we can actually bring this into practice, because it's one thing to talk about, bringing together different aspects of ourselves, whether that's the masculine energy and the feminine energy, or we might say the conscious and the unconscious, or the active principle and the passive principle. There's many ways that we might look at this, and we have looked, I think, in the last podcast about some of those polar opposite energies. But, what does that really mean when we talk about real work? What does that look like when we start putting that together in practice? And, what does it do for us? I think Jung took this on as well as the process of individuation, which means, bringing together the active principle of ourselves and the passive principle, so that we actually, instead of just staying in the realm of reflecting back what's out there in the world already, we become capable of creating our own light, our own direction, our own thoughts and values, and actually putting that out into the world. So you could see the sun and the moon in this way. Like, first of all, the moon is reflective. We have that energy of being able to reflect other aspects in the world. But once we really come to the alchemy of the marriage, the sun actually starts becoming more of the process, and we become able to really project our own self out there in the world. And I'm finding too, this is a process I feel I'm going through again at the moment, because the world is really calling us to not just go along with the status quo, not just to go along with the crowd's mind, not just to, jump on board whatever is already out there, but really to call to us as individuals, as people, to look in our own hearts and to see what is really needing to come forth right now, that maybe we as individuals have a piece of that that's important. And so every person's, it's not like one person's more important than everyone else. We all bring our self to this current time. So how does that look when we bring that together? Well, in a lot of ways, if you take it as maybe the unconscious, archetypal world where we're connected as human beings, we're connected in the world, we have these energies that we maybe even aren't aware of. We have cultural aspects. We're starting to kind of look at, well, what cultural or archetypal thoughts or feelings or directions or values have I taken on unconsciously that are part of myself and part of how I act in the world? What have I taken on from that, that subconscious, unconscious realm? And I think many of us, for a long time probably didn't really think of that as a separate part of ourselves. We're just like, well, that's the way things are done. If let's say monogamy, for instance, was maybe part of your cultural, you know, ancestry. So we take that on as a value, and that's considered to be part of ourselves, right? So we have this, whether we as an individual agree with that or not, there's some part of ourselves that are being brought along with that. You could say, you know, a lot of the things that are being brought up right now, the patriarchy, um, the way that we the way that we bring ourselves to the world, our values. Maybe we've inherited the value of money as a way of being in the world, as a value. The main reason for doing anything is to make money. All of these things are in the collective unconscious. We have taken that on because we are born in the time we're born, and we are brought up and raised in the time we're brought up and raised. And there's no point, really, in my mind anyway, there's no point fighting against this. We are who we are. We are raised in this archetypal place. You know, we are given a set of values and thoughts and feelings and ways of doing things from our culture. And you know, if that makes you angry because you don't think those are good values, that might be a way to begin your process of the alchemical marriage, of the marriage inside. But you know, you have to acknowledge that that is there, right? So you have to really look at what is there. And you know, many of us want to believe that we are immune to all of this, that we are an individual in our ivory tower looking out at the world, and out there is all chaos, and out there is all, you know, all the bad stuff, and we in our ivory tower are of course immune to all of that. And you know, that basically separates us. You know, if you're stuck in an ivory tower, you're not, there's no intimacy, there's no marriage going on there between you and the outer world, or you and the unconscious. There's just you deluding yourself that you are somehow already better than, right? So there's this part of ourselves that maybe wants to feel like we have an individual self, our conscious self, that we are not all of that, or that we don't include all of that. Maybe there's a lot of bleakness, there's a lot of evil, there's a lot of darkness in the world, and we don't want to put ourselves in with all of that, understandably. But this whole sacred marriage requires that we actually take that in, that as part of ourselves. And I'm not saying it's everything. We don't have to jump into that unconscious, you know, realm and say, okay, that's it, that's all there is. But we have to acknowledge that it's there, and it's there inside of ourselves as well, and that we're willing to marry those two aspects, that innocent part of ourselves and that part of ourselves in the unconscious that we have to take on. And not all of the unconscious is a negative or shadows. You know, well, it's shadow in that we're unconscious until we become conscious of it, but it's not necessarily evil. It just needs to be brought into reality with our conscious self. So as we begin to look and notice that there's parts of ourselves that have come from this collective understanding, you know, maybe maybe it looks something like getting involved in a local group. You know, I've become involved for the last few years in a local, very local, our community organization, noticing that the other people in the community are not necessarily thinking the same as me. You know, we have lots of different ways of looking at things. We have different religions, we have different cultures, sometimes we have different languages, we have different ways of looking at things, we have different ways we deal with the world, we have different news channels we listen to, you know, all of that stuff. And yet there's you know, a cohesiveness. You know, I grew up in this neighborhood, and there's something of myself here. And what is that, right? I might not agree with others that live here, maybe not very many people that live here, but I grew up in this area, and there are certain things I've taken on, and some of those things might be the way that social gatherings come about, the way that I deal with other genders, as much as I've become, more open minded and I've lived in different cultures. But there's a certain aspect of me that is like, oh, yeah, it's pretty normal for the men to go outside and work in the fields or whatever, and the women to do the housework. And that is something that is inherent in the culture where I grew up. Whether I believe that's right or have the values of that, or whether I'm willing to do anything different, that's where I bring that cultural value into more consciousness and say, well, do I want to keep that, or do I want to work with it? And so, obviously, I've lived in a number of different cultures and different countries, and I have started to see that I've taken on different cultural values, and some of them stay the same. When I was a Muslim for many years, there was a similar kind of men woman divide as far as jobs were concerned, quite often. And it wasn't so strict, but it did sort of match my already unconscious growing up values in my community. So it wasn't that big a stretch for me to change to that. It's actually more of a stretch for me when I became more involved in maybe the community, studying somatic work, studying somatic sex education, different genders, different roles. It wasn't always um, a gender split as far as socializing. There was much more mixing around. So I actually had to consciously take that on because that wasn't actually fitting with my collective unconscious cultural underlay. So I had to become more conscious of that and conscious of what I wanted to choose of that, not to just jump into another unconscious way of doing things. So these unconscious beliefs and these archetypal kind of beliefs that Jung talks about um, are easily left in the shadow unless we're willing to look at that. And we don't often look at that stuff unless we bump up against someone that doesn't think the same as we do, which is interesting because in this day and age, it's very easy to just keep your friends list to people that think the same way you do. And if they don't think the same way you do, you kind of unfriend someone, or you're like, I don't want to hang out with you. And it's not that often that we end up bumping up against people that think quite differently than ourselves. And so this actually is slowing down our process of individuation, our process of the sacred marriage, because now we're not even meeting anybody that's going to show us where we have these unconscious parts of ourselves. So anyway, I do believe one thing is to put yourself in groups of people where you think quite differently, and to listen to them and to notice, what does that show up in me when I bump up against these people that have different values. Maybe it helps you become more aware of what your values are. Maybe it helps you become aware of where you've subconsciously or unconsciously taken on beliefs that maybe you don't want to take on, and you can become more conscious of those. So as we're in this reflective, that's kind of the moon aspect. We're reflecting. We need to be reflectors for other people. We need to bump up against people that think differently and do things differently than ourselves. And I don't actually have to look that far afield for that, because I find even my parents think quite differently on certain aspects than I do. My partner, my current intimate partner, thinks quite differently than myself. You just need to have relationships where you're dealing with deep enough concepts that you actually notice where you disagree, or where you feel triggered, or where you're feeling, oh, that's not actually in line with what I want to think and feel. So bumping up against people that think differently than we do, that feel differently than we do, that act differently than we do, is a really great start to noticing what is in our unconscious self and finding that reflecting kind of energy. And as we become more aware of that unconscious aspects and we start bringing that into the light, we also become aware that we actually may have something to share. We actually may have some values or some thoughts or some ways of looking at things, perspectives that may be important to share. And so we begin to individuate. We begin to have that marriage of the unconscious part of ourselves with the conscious part and say, oh, I actually want to now consciously put out some ideas into the world of my own. And this is like the coming together of the conscious and unconscious parts of ourselves. And now we begin to birth into the world something of ourselves that may have, um, have a necessary and beneficial effect, because we need people to put out their new ideas, their new perspectives. We need people to be conscious of themselves and offering of themselves, from this sacred marriage, from this bringing together of, this awareness of their own unconscious and bringing it into their conscious aspect. And then, actually acting differently. And art is a really wonderful way to start bringing this up as well. Having an artistic practice, which may not necessarily mean that you have to be an artist. It could be that you get out some colored pencils and that you make a mandala every morning for a month or longer, that you just see what starts coming up, that you take some time to meditatively create from your own psyche. So not copying, like, it's not like nothing wrong with going to a paint night where you're getting told what to paint, but really bringing from your own psyche, what colors do you like, even going out in nature and, maybe just noticing the sunset and really seeing what calls to you. Maybe you take photographs of things that you notice. Maybe you make a little, artistic grouping of pine cones or something outside. Perhaps you sing when you're going, in the car. You sing some different notes and you sing some songs, or you make up your own song. These kinds of artistic things help you bring up this unconscious or subconscious parts and bring it into the conscious, and now you're creating with it. So artistic practice is a really beautiful way to work with this, and it takes us out of the, if you do have a job where everything is kind of set, you do this and then you do this and then you do that, and send this email and that email, like there's maybe not so much creativity in your work. It's really helpful to do some sort of artistic practice as part of your daily life. The other way to kind of come to the unconscious and bring it into the conscious, so have the sacred marriages, body awareness practices. It could be a yoga class, it could be just moving your body, it could be dancing to some music you like, it could be just a conscious touch practice with yourself. All of these things help you notice what is present, right? This is kind of where it starts, to notice what is present already there in you, and notice whether that's an unconscious part that comes up, or whether this is a newly emerging part of yourself that is getting ready to be birthed into the world, or that you are becoming aware of wanting to shine out your light into the world. So finding out what's there. So the body practice, movement practice, the body and the soul coming together is another way of looking at the sacred marriage. And so if you just spend a lot of your time either online thinking, or you do a lot of work in your head, you want to actually consider bringing your body into a practice. So even if it's, washing the dishes is one of the the Buddhist practices of mindfulness, but just doing anything with your body in a mindful way, noticing how your body feels, what are the sensations that you notice, how does that feel when you move your body, what sort of feelings and emotions come up when you move your body in that way. Are you aware of pain? Are you aware of pleasure? Are you aware of all these things that can start bringing up some new realizations in you? This is the marriage of, your mind and your body, your soul and spirit and your body. So that's another way to bring it up. So anything body practice wise, anything artistic where you're really trying to tap into that unconscious, just, noticing what comes up. Anything, when you're reflecting with others and noticing you're noticing what comes up when you interact with other people. All of these aspects start to give you more clarity on your own self and on your ability to bring together these parts of yourself. So, all of these activities will be included in our upcoming retreat, Beltane retreat, the Sacred Marriage Within. And I'm really excited about sharing some of these sacred alchemical practices with you that aren't necessarily so complicated. They're not so complex and esoteric as you think, but they're super powerful when you actually do them. And especially if you're doing them in a group, because now you get to have that reflection of the group as well and have the sacred space and container to dive into some of this stuff. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to me, or you can go to ourceltichearth.com, ourceltichearth.com. That's our retreat center website, and take a look at our upcoming Beltane retreat. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and it's got you thinking a little bit about, the idea of the sacred marriage within, of bringing together these two aspects. And, I'll just leave with this parting idea that as we start to individuate, as we really start to find ourselves, we become able to be in relationship with other people in a much more conscious way. And so if that is something that you aspire to, that you want to have the kind of relationship that is more conscious, that is more aware, that, you've got a partner that really gets you, that you can be in this place of exploration and curiosity with, this is a really great start, is to really look within and find that process within ourselves first. So I hope that gives you some things to think about, and I look forward to hearing from you. If you would like to comment, if you haven't subscribed to my podcast, please take a moment to subscribe, and I would love to have you join us again. Thank you so much.